How do we know when enough is enough? How can we tell if our appetite is satisfied or sated? I don't know about you, but my sense of satisfaction or enoughness was broken long ago. For much of my life, I would repeatedly pass through the state of enough and move to being sated or overly full, be it with food, responsibilities, even self-improvement. It seemed no matter how much I tried, it was never enough. This is still something that I struggle with, although it's getting better all the time. And being here with everyone today and just seeing your faces and knowing what we represent and who we are together, it is enough. Enough is as good as a feast. One of my favorite quotes, introduced to me by one of my parishioners, Meryl Maleska Wilbur. I find the old English saying provocative. It always makes me stop and think. Its pithiness demonstrates the truth of its message. Enough is as good as a feast. I must acknowledge that my reflection this morning is written for those of us who have the privilege and the burden of being able to over-consume. Many in life are not, and I recognize that. For those of us who can over-consume, and I can speak only from that place, the question is, when is enough enough? It is a challenging one, and I believe a critical question. When does more become not enough, but destructive? When does more become not enough, but destructive? In the simplest of terms, we know we've had enough when we're able to appreciate what it is that we are doing or consuming or experiencing, and to appreciate and be present to the company of our companions. Eating enough food, for example, leaves our bellies feeling warm, secure. We smile and maybe can even salivate when we remember what we just finished eating. Enjoying enough company with others brings about a sense of belonging, connection, stimulation, or comfort. We finish the time together different than when we started, having met our social or emotional or intellectual needs. Enough, when it comes to something like web surfing, gives us the information that we need to write a paper or make a decision. We may finish our research more curious or assured or even confused. However it is, when we're finished, we actually remember what it was that we were researching when we started. On the other hand, more than enough food leaves us feeling physically uncomfortable, often regretful, and sometimes even shameful. How did I do it again? It was only going to be one bite. When we've had more than enough company, we might stop listening, start to check out, be there in our body, but not in our minds or hearts. We may become insensitive in our interactions. When we have exceeded a healthy amount of screen time, we can become disoriented, disconnected, and drained. I find that living in accordance with this principle of enough allows me to experience genuine gratitude, connection, and yes, even bliss. Those things don't happen for me when I overindulge in anything. Lest I am making this sound easy, I reassure you it's not, at least in my experience. For many, if not most of us, this process of enough, consuming enough, doing enough, whether it's physical, mental, or social consumption, is something we have to learn to do I dare say it is a spiritual practice. Unless, of course, we've been so fortunate to have been taught otherwise, which would mean we were parented perfectly and that we lived unaffected by the prevailing culture that is around us, a culture that promotes more than enough through marketing, portion sizes, and addictive technology. The value of moderation or enoughness is an ancient truth. 2 of the 3 inscriptions on a column before the Temple of Delphi read, "Know thyself and nothing in excess." Why then is it so difficult to live this way? Well, there are many answers to that. I'll offer just one example of each of the physical, mental, and spiritual reasons as I see them. Physically, it is hard and challenging for many of us to stay in our bodies. We've learned to dissociate, distract ourselves, or intellectualize every time we get too close to a feeling, especially if it's challenging. Mentally, many of us have bought into this lie that more is better. Sadly, this lie can also carry over into our spiritual lives. William Blake knew this, I believe, when he wrote, "To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of our hand and eternity in an hour." Can you remember when you experienced eternity in a moment? Maybe it was as recent as this morning. Perhaps it was long ago. The Encyclopedia Britannica were my entry into eternity that years later the World Wide Web often steals from me. Picture, if you will, 45 years ago, I was 10 years old, wearing braids in class. I raised my hand. It was a history class. And I asked a question I don't actually even remember exactly. My teacher's response was predictable. She said, "I don't know. Why don't you find out?" They were the exact words I needed to gain a hall pass to be able to go to the library, where answers lay hidden on the bookshelves. My saddle shoes made a certain clumpy sound as I skipped across the linoleum floors to the library. I pulled up a stool to the stacks, stood on my tippy toes, and held my breath in anticipation. The heavy volume nearly dropped into my loving embrace, from where I carried it over to the long wooden table in the library and opened it with a gasp. The pictures, the words, the worlds, eternity. And sooner or later, an answer to the question that I had asked, whatever it was. I still remember the sense of devastation that I felt some 15 years later when the World Wide Web came onto the scene. Somehow I knew it ran the risk of robbing me of the chance to meet eternity in my quest for truth, found when I put my hands on the edges of books, the scent of their pages, the words, and the images that opened up the world. More was not better. True to that inkling, I still must be very careful about how quickly and frequently I turn to look online for answers and for what duration. The information I find there is often suspicious in its source, can be distracting if not overwhelming, and has yet to invite me into eternity. How then do we master this skill of, or spiritual practice of taking in enough? I think first, it's important to acknowledge and remember that what is enough differs for you and me. For example, I cannot consume sugar. I need to severely limit my television and media input. And I find more than one party on any one day too much. On the other hand, the 2 hours of spiritual practice that I spend every morning would be intolerable for anyone else in my family. Second, consuming enough needs to be something we do consciously and intentionally and consistently, even as it is imperfectly, and to allow ourselves a time when we do overindulge and enjoy every moment. It does begin in our mind. Sociologist and author Brene Brown says, for me, and I quote her words, for me, the opposite of scarcity is not abundance, it's enough. I am enough, she writes. My kids are enough. My wish for you this Thanksgiving is that you take the time to experience enough and to find that feast, whether it's looking at one flower, taking a long walk with nothing else to do, or having a simple conversation with a neighbor, or even the family member who gets under your skin. May you experience the miracle of eternity that comes with enough and nothing more. Amen, and blessed be.